Good afternoon and welcome to the Insight Speaker Series. Today we are going to discuss behavioral threat assessment and management in the United States. My name is Erin Grace. I am the Director of Communications and External Relations for the National Counterterrorism Innovation, Technology, and Education Center based at the University of Nebraska. With me today are two special guests offering the national and local perspectives on behavioral threat assessment, and I'm really excited to share their perspectives with you. First up, though, a few housekeeping items. Understand that we are on Zoom webinar, a platform that does not allow for a chat, but please post your questions in the Q&A. We will get to them, as many of them as we can, in the Q&A portion of our event. Also, for those of you who are joining us who have registered, you will get a recap of this within a couple days with the recording and some of the highlights pulled out. For those of you who are joining us on YouTube or watching the live stream from our website, please subscribe to our newsletter so you can get our updates on events and can join them. And so with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Melissa Zisler. Melissa has an impressive resume. She holds a doctorate. She is a career intelligence professional with the Department of Homeland Security. In her current role, she's director of the National Threat Evaluation and Reporting Program Office, providing training and tools to assist our partners in identifying and mitigating threats of terrorism and targeted violence. Melissa also serves as a board member for Insight. We recently had her in Omaha at our conference, and she's got so much wisdom to share that, Melissa, I'm going to have you talk for a little bit, and then we'll get to our second guest, CJ Wren from the Phoenix Police Department. So, Melissa, welcome.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much. Give me 1 second while I pull this up. Okay, can you see my slides?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. I promise I will not bore everybody with a billion slides. I just have a couple to share with you all today. So good afternoon. My name is Melissa Zisler, as Erin mentioned. I'm the director for the National Threat Evaluation and Reporting Program Office within the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Intelligence and Analysis. So we refer to our office as the ENTER Program Office for short. I know that's a mouthful of words for a title. So I'm really excited to be here with you all today. Thank you so much to Insight for the invite, and to Erin. I really want to start off with telling you all just a little bit about who Enter is, a little bit about our mission, how we are working at the federal level to really help build our partners' capacity across the country to prevent terrorism and targeted violence. So just to kind of set the stage here, before we dig in, we've all recognized that the threat environment is continuing to evolve, right? So we are dealing increasingly with acts of targeted violence. We have mass shootings at schools, workplaces, houses of worship, everyday places across our communities. We've just seen, the attempted assassination on former President Trump, right? So we're learning that many of these actors have overlapping belief systems and an array of personal grievances that don't necessarily neatly align with one of our traditional or post 9/11 constructs of terrorism. So we're all trying to effectively address this problem, and there's really no short-term or one-size-fits-all solution. We all know that there are warning signs in the lead up to these attacks, right? We say perpetrators don't just snap, they decide. And these warning signs and behaviors can help law enforcement and other providers intervene to stop them from occurring. Right. And we are all trying to work together on this with our federal, state, and local partners to really get ahead of these threats at the earliest possible point. So with that said, I do want to introduce you to the ENTER program office today and what we're doing from a federal perspective to keep our communities safe. So I've been with the department for over 13 years now and spent the majority of my time doing intelligence analysis, But in 2019, when the department began taking a more strategic approach to terrorism prevention and really expanding beyond the scope to respond to the current threat environment. And at that time, the Enter office was established, and we were tasked with figuring out how we could assist our state and local partners in this space. And that's when I joined the prevention mission. So Enter did already at that point house the Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative, or the NSI. And this initiative was developed after 9/11. It focuses on terrorism prevention, primarily for our law enforcement partners. But the initiative really works closely with the public-facing If You See Something, Say Something campaign, which hopefully all of you have heard of. And it really encourages the public to report those indicators of potential terrorist activity. So we wanted to expand our support to our partners in this space. And to figure out the best way to do that, we held a working group with experts in the field of targeted violence prevention. So the Enter team came together, and we had folks from the FBI, US Secret Service, US Capitol Police, academic researchers, law enforcement analysts, you name it, and of course the lawyers, right? For several days, we discussed what existed in the space of targeted violence prevention and what was missing. And we learned that behavioral threat assessment and management was a best practice in targeted violence prevention, and that there was no national framework that existed for behavioral threat assessment and management, no national framework that could be adapted across sectors, across jurisdictions, so that everyone in this space was speaking common language and had common tools. So in case you're not familiar, behavioral threat assessment and management, or I'll refer to it as BTAM, is a systematic, fact-based process, and it's designed to help safety stakeholders identify threats and prevent acts of targeted violence. So it focuses on an individual's pattern of thinking and behavior to determine whether and to what extent that person is moving towards an act of violence. So the goal is really to intervene at the earliest possible point and provide strategies to ensure that that person does not progress on the path to violence. So it's really used to assess and manage a variety of concerns, right? So things like domestic violence, threats against public officials, school attacks, workplace violence, attacks in public spaces, insider threats, and even terrorism. Okay, so now you know what BTAM is. You know there was a gap. So what did we do about it? Well, we created our behavioral threat assessment integration line of effort, and this really helped to fill a gap for our partners. The creation of this effort was a broader recognition that the Office of Intelligence and Analysis needed to build on the suspicious activity reporting foundation that was laid by that NSI initiative, and really help DHS further expand awareness to recognize those early warning signs of targeted violence and terrorism, really to help explain how targeted violence and terrorism indicators are really intertwined from a behavioral standpoint, and to give our partners the tools they need to develop BTAM capabilities locally. So how are we doing this? Right, primarily through our Master Trainer program. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Our Master Trainer program is an instructor development and certification program that prepares our federal, state, and local partners to train their local communities in BTAM techniques and best practices. And once those folks are certified, we equip them with a suite of training content that they can use to train their communities and build out those local BTAM capabilities. So ultimately, our goal is to build a national network of trainers who can spread the word on BTAM and are speaking the same language, to set up teams and really to work together to prevent these incidents of targeted violence. So our master trainers are from many different sectors. We have folks from law enforcement, school safety, insider threat, workplace violence prevention, healthcare. And right now, so we started this program at the end of 2020, and excuse me. Right now, we have about 500 people in the network nationwide. So it's pretty amazing. It's really awesome to see the impact and how our master trainers are really implementing this program and utilizing these materials in their communities and their agencies. Erin, I will pass it back to you.
Sounds good, Melissa. Thank you so much for that very succinct and important outline of what BTAM looks like, what it is, and how it's applied nationally. You know, just reflecting on what you said, it's so interesting just even having a common language for things that people in different sectors, different jobs can see. So lots of questions already that I have percolating, but before we get to those, we do want to hear from CJ Wren. So thank you, Melissa, for that. Let me introduce you to CJ for a second, folks. He's been a member of the Phoenix Police Department since 1998. And so this meant he was already there after 9/11. So when the department, started a Homeland Security or Homeland Defense Bureau, he got tapped to do that. He then worked for the Arizona Counterterrorism Information Center. And about 10 or so years ago, the detective was he basically started their BTAM before BTAM, the Statewide Threat Assessment and Mitigation Program. It's called STAMP in Phoenix. And so Melissa has given us the national overview of what this is. CJ, we're really eager to hear from you about how that is applied locally in Phoenix, given your impressive background. So why don't you take it away for us, CJ? Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. I want to echo what Melissa said as well for just nice for the invite. Really appreciate Insight and also being on the dais with Melissa too. I met Melissa through email a couple of years ago when the Enter program reached out to Arizona, and we have a very unique program at the ACTIC. As a law enforcement detective, I go out to major scenes, but my partner is actually a Phoenix fire captain. So we become the intel and the resource for all major scenes out there. That has actually expanded into the ACTIC, where all of our partnerships and things are both police and fire. It's not just one side versus the other. And Melissa was in contact with Captain Gabe Sines, who actually runs our threat liaison program. And I got to hear about Enter, and what the unique thing about Enter is, exactly as Melissa discussed, they brought in experts from all over. It wasn't just one thought process that kind of guided through. It wasn't just BAU. Now, anyone who sees the Enter Master Trainer program and the classes they do, they definitely get the BAU flavor and insight from there. You also see the Secret Service, and then but it allows those of us in the state and local side to be able to also increase, to put our own tone to it, and things of what works here in Arizona may not be the same thing that works in, say, Las Vegas or Hawaii, North Carolina, things like that, who also have some very successful BTAM teams that are out there. In Phoenix specifically, and actually, sorry, in Arizona specifically, not Phoenix, we have, through the Counterterrorism Center, we have rolled out Enter and the Master Trainer program as our baseline training for BTAM. And because and I know we didn't get into it quite yet, but Enter makes it very deliverable, not depending on who it is that you're teaching. They have like a 1-hour video that they can use, and we've tried to utilize some of that for community awareness. They've also have the BTURC, which is what we choose to use when we're training our threat liaison officers during their 40-hour class. We will use that portion, which is about a 3-hour version, going over kind of the beginnings of, where BTAM started way back, when President Reagan was shot, and that's when the Secret Service really started working in this field. Going going forward, we have had some, actually Inter came to Arizona just this past April and taught the full 4-day Turk training, as well as trained. We had about 30 new master trainers that they certified for us, which is so helpful because we only had a few of us in Arizona before. Now we have a much wider range, more folks that can go out and train. So we just see it expanding immensely through there. And the one last thing I'd like to talk about with the Inter program that makes it so unique is that they don't say this is the end all be all. As a trainer who also has going out to, like I said, major scenes and things like that, I don't have a lot of time to be able to keep updating my PowerPoint and things like that. Inter does that actually for us. They will, in fact, there was a discussion about a year ago about the definition of targeted violence. And again, Inter went out to experts, kind of got a better feel for what that, because it looked a lot like the terrorism statute before that and terrorism definition. They changed it, sent it out to all of us master trainers, and now we have that updated, which it would have taken me a really long time for it. So it's very important to our outreach to in Arizona to be able to use the Inter program.
Thank you, CJ. I want to start with you on the first question that I have, and I want to invite our audience to send in questions already. We've got a few, so thank you, audience, for sending them in. But so you both have outlined kind of theoretically what is BTAM and how does this look and how did it get created and how do we train up more people in it. But I'm wondering if you might have a specific story or two that basically shows what this looks like on the ground. Maybe a success story of an intervention that could have prevented a violent act.
I have a very timely one that just happened within the last couple of days. Because we have the STAMP program out there and it is statewide for us, we have federal resources. We have, again, the Phoenix FBI, the Phoenix Secret Service Office, things like that. It's all a true partnership. In fact, I am not the only program manager. I actually have a co-program manager from the FBI's BAU partner here in Phoenix. But we had our first, in Arizona, most of our schools are going back into school this week and into next week. And we had our first school threat that came out even before they landed back in the classroom. And it was through partnership that being able to reach out, I'm not sure, I didn't get permission to talk about the different agencies, but it was actually in Tempe, Arizona. And they have a very good Tempe PD threat team that they work. Between them, their school resource officers, it came into the threat came into the ACTIC actually from the FBI. It was a social media threat. And we get these threats to life that come in. We were able to work together collectively. And it wasn't like I'm having to call and introduce myself as CJ Wren and give a resume of why I'm calling you. It was very well understood. Hey, we have a potential threat to life that came in through social media. By working with not only the Tempe threat unit, but also they connected us with their school resource officer supervisor and a very good school resource officer that knew the school, knew the family, and that's what BTAM really is about, that we're able to connect all of these dots together to be able to solve something. And the threat was for the next day when school was back in session, and the SRO recognized the name that was used, recognized the address, and they were able to go out there and mitigate the threat even before it came out, before it could have taken place. That's a huge success story for us because we never want to see, not only Arizona, we don't want to see it anywhere, but those tragic loss of life at schools and things. And even if it turns out, and we're not trying to, make cases from the law enforcement side, we would much rather solve a problem before it becomes a criminal act. then we certainly don't want to be putting kids in jail and things like that. If we can help to correct the issue before it actually becomes an issue. But very timely success story with just the last 48 hours that we've been dealing with.
CJ, thank you for sharing that. Before I get to you, Melissa, just a follow-up quick. So in the case of this threat for the student, and I want to emphasize that BTAM isn't about just putting people in jail, like just a law
No.
enforcement approach. And so a lot of times we know that folks won't report suspicious activity because they're not sure what's going to happen. They might be afraid. They don't want to get anyone in trouble. Maybe it doesn't rise to that level. In this case, can you say how the threat was mitigated? What happened to the student?
They went out and the school is going to handle it specifically themselves, but with the school resource officer. And thank you for making that point, because you're exactly right. BTAM is not about the punishment. It is about keeping people safe and keeping people talking and communicating about these threats. A truism that comes out of law enforcement that we understand that if we cannot arrest ourselves out of all of these threats. It simply can't happen. And the truism is, even if we do arrest them, a lot of times those students will be right back in that school within just a few days. And now what kind of an issue are you dealing with now for it? And of course, BTAM isn't only about schools, but that just was the example that we had in the last couple of days. But the SROs working with the school administration are going to handle it. There was a police report written because the student did make a threat. It's about their behavior that we're looking at, not about, who the student is, race, color, creed, anything else like that. It is, they did make a threat. Law enforcement took a report, but it really comes to the schools to be the ones to working with the schools to be able to manage this and try to find a solution to what the person was so upset about that they made the threat.
Thank you for that. That's a really good concrete example that I think we can all wrap our minds around. Melissa, let's turn it to you. What trends do you see with BTAM? How are communities embracing it, and what success stories, if any, do you have with it?
Yeah, so I think some of the trends, I guess, that we're seeing are, there's been more and more legislation being introduced and passed that require threat assessment teams. A lot of it's in schools, but there's also some in counties across the country. So this is a lot of different states are taking this approach. However, unfortunately, these requirements do usually follow an incident, right? So it seems to take a tragedy to spark action. And we've seen this time and time again, right? We've seen it in Michigan and Iowa and New York. So we really need to be proactive and encourage our policymakers to support this practice to prevent these attacks, right, in advance. So, and I think as far as success goes, in addition to these specific acts that are thwarted or these individuals that are getting intervention assistance, it's really that coalition building and that community involvement. So for us, success is really dependent on our master trainers and the stories that they tell us, the success of our trainers, right? When they engage with new partners in their communities, when they have new partners come to the table for threat assessment, or when they go out and train some of these folks on what these concerning behaviors are, and we see an uptick in reporting. This is really what success means to the Enter program office more specifically. I know CJ has some more of those, tangible success stories that he can point to.
Thank you for that. Your master trainer numbers probably tell part of the story that more people see this as a need and are signing up for it. But I guess, CJ, since you are in a police department and a detective, how receptive are your law enforcement peers to this kind of approach versus a strictly law enforcement approach?
I think it's growing. it is I mentioned the word truism earlier. It's a truism along a lot of sectors that we're in law enforcement, and I'm not speaking specifically for Phoenix PD, but for all law enforcement, we are having to do more with less. We don't have the people power out there to be on the street to deal with this. So to have a program like Enter be able to give us a program that we can, maybe a single person can go out and train numbers on this. I did see some of the questions in Q&A where we are able to go out to businesses and train those folks and things to get it outside of the law enforcement spectrum. But I think law enforcement, we know we need help. We know we're not the only ones out there on an island trying to solve this. We didn't get a chance to really mention it, but I will speak to ATAP just for a second. And the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals has taken that approach since its inception, that it's not just law enforcement, it is the psychologists, the mental health professionals, public health, education, that it takes everyone to come together to be able to solve these problems and proactively address this, not just, it's not a law enforcement only problem by any means.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you. Melissa, did you want to add to that? Sorry. Didn't know if I'd interrupted you there, but
But I mean, CJ's right. I think, we're definitely seeing this trending up in a lot of different disciplines, which is fantastic. And I do think it took a bit, right, for the law enforcement community to kind of come around, and we're still kind of working that a little bit. But we have a lot of great advocates like CJ to help us with that work. And different advocates in some of the law enforcement associations like IACP are also helpful with kind of that messaging and really spreading the word on why BTAM works, right? Why it's important, and that it is a multidisciplinary practice. It's not a law enforcement approach. So it is really pulling in a lot of those different community members, different disciplines to really take a holistic approach to prevention.
good, thank you. This actually tees up one of the questions perfectly from the Q&A. There's a viewer who says that they are in a school system and they want to get a community BTAM going with their stakeholders. How to start it?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the biggest struggles is buy-in, right? And I think, we talk about that a lot within our master trainer network. We've tried to put out, some resources to help some of our master trainers to kind of, I guess for a lack of a better term, convince, right, some of their stakeholders that this is a worthwhile practice. They should invest in this. They should be part of this approach. So we do have some resources on our website to kind of help with that. But I think it's hard. And I think, a lot of people still have the perspective of this will never happen here, right? So if you take a look at your community and say, this could happen here, right? And I think thinking about a lot of it's bad to say it this way, but like a cost benefit analysis, right? Like we don't want this to happen here. Look at where this has happened in the past. Look at some of these successful BTAM programs that are out there. And I think some of these success stories on attacks that have been thwarted can be helpful in getting some of these folks on board. I think something else that could be helpful is CJ and Insight was just a part of, we had a workshop in DC hosted by the Enter office and Insight and our partners with DHS Science and Technology a couple weeks ago to talk about baseline capabilities for behavioral threat assessment and management teams. And what does it take for a behavioral threat team to be successful? How can they sustain, right? Especially because everyone has different resources. Everyone's in a different environment, whether you're rural or whether you're in a city. And so what are some of these, really baseline capabilities that exist across the spectrum that folks can harness to start up these teams. And so we will have, a report or a tangible resource coming out that will help our partners and our stakeholders with some of these questions. So CJ, I don't know if you have some more to add to that.
Yeah, just real briefly, I can say there are, to the person that wants to start a community-based team, there are some great private sector resources as far as there are companies that offer those and they're very all-encompassing. But I will say from a more general point is start your team now. Exactly like Melissa said, get your team, whether it's at your district level, at your, at the classroom or the school level, start talking about these things. If you have been lucky enough not to have experienced one of these tragic cases, I know we're kind of dealing more when the school related threats and things, but if you're lucky enough not to have gone through one of these, there's plenty of tabletops out there that you could sit there and discuss, what if this happened? What if the incident in Michigan happened here in, in wherever your jurisdiction is? Talk about it. How would you as a school, how would you as a district gone to start dealing with those things? Because when I have got a colleague that likes to say, it's almost too late when, the Fox and CNN vans show up in front of your school and put a microphone in your face to start talking BTAM then. But there's a lot of resources out there, and I also will point to the Enter website. They've done some phenomenal work of gathering resources from all over and then making that available for you.
Thank you for that. I want to bring up the issue of mental health, since that appears to be a theme in questions that are popping up in the Q&A. And again, audience, awesome job. Thank you so much for sending them our way. Reminds me of a time when I was a reporter and went on a ride along with a cop all day, CJ, and all these 911 calls are really because of a dearth of mental health resources in our communities, right? Families are just at their wits' end and they call 911, and then these cops may or may not have any training and don't know what to do, and so anyway, the question, this particular question has to do with the kind of a cultural perspective of what is mental illness. How do people who are responding know what they're seeing? What if it's static? This person says participants have a hard time understanding that people's behavioral and mental health can change over time. Do you have any experience facing similar training challenges or suggestions for addressing essentially the big issue of mental health in a constructive way?
Wow, that's a big question. I will start with this, and law enforcement does need to be trained in that for awareness reasons. And I think we're doing a much better job because it, as Aaron said, it is such a large problem that we're dealing with everywhere in the United States, not just my home state. But I can tell you that there are some great programs that have been born out of that idea where law enforcement officers are not trained in psychology, trained in, diagnosing, and nor should we be. We're looking at behaviors and looking at what kind of, what can we do to help that person through whatever the issue is that they're going through right now. And folks, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I know there are examples out there where this didn't go right when law enforcement got involved with these kind of incidents, but we are doing a better job. Law enforcement across the board recognizes that this is, an issue. And I think that whoever wrote the question brought up a really good point, that mental health, whatever the flare up is, whatever the issue is that we are dealing with right then and there, is just a moment in that person, a moment in time for that person that it could change. That's why we're putting not only law enforcement teams out there to be able to de-escalate a response, but also we have some great community teams, different areas around the country. Got another example, and I'm picking on Tempe, but Tempe in Arizona has a program called Care 7, and they have been a true leader in our state for how law enforcement and the community threat teams can work together in these examples. But I obviously can't talk about, I'm not trained. I can observe someone that is having mental health issues and I have my ideas, but I am not properly trained to be able to diagnose. But no one's asking me to do that either. It's really trying to just make sure that that person is safe and that those around them are safe is what we in law enforcement should be focusing on.
Melissa, anything to add to that on the subject of mental illness?
No, I'll steer clear of that one.
Okay, well, I have another one, and it has to do with privacy. Because I think often what stops us from making that extra step in reporting a suspicious activity is a sense that perception we might be violating someone's privacy and maybe unfairly. In fact, when we had a situation at Insight in which we engaged our threat assessment team, suddenly the next step to mitigate made me go, whoa! And so I do believe there is a degree of education that just has to happen across the board, even with people, so-called experts, who should know better, that this is kind of what this looks like. But let's get to the idea of privacy. When someone calls in a suspicious activity and a BTAM team is kind of activated, how do you balance the needs for safety with the rights of the individual who is the alleged threatener? And don't answer all at once.
No, I wanted to give Melissa a chance to respond to that first and things. So.
I'll kind of defer to CJ on that. I think for us, we definitely, privacy and civil rights and civil liberties are at the forefront of everything that we do. It is a huge block of our training as well. So we ensure that our master trainers are fully, trained on that aspect. I think there can be a lot of confusion with behavioral threat assessment and management as far as like, is this profiling, right? And CJ kind of touched on that as well, right? So this is not profiling. This has to do with someone's behavior specifically, right? And the BTAM teams certainly take the privacy of the individual very seriously and have protocols and procedures to go about handling the situation. But I'll let CJ speak to it, more specifically.
Thank you, Melissa. I echo what you said. Privacy concerns are paramount. We just had a discussion with our statewide stamp group on our Tuesday call directly about this the other day, as far as how much we can share. Going back to a school threat, we are not keeping notes on, an individual student going forward and things, but it is important to know to balance that privacy concern with the safety concern. And that is really what we're trying to do in BTAM, and that's keep people safe. So one person, and I'm probably tiptoeing through a minefield here when it comes to privacy, but I will say it is important to note that whether it's a student, whether it's a person in a workplace, they make a threat to harm others. We know they've made a threat to harm others, and we have done our due diligence to make sure it is that person that is making that threat, that their rights to say what they want, First Amendment rights and things like that, shouldn't outweigh the safety and the concern that others have. With the way that the U.S. Secret Service identified the 11 investigative themes, that's one of the big caveats to there is other people are concerned, and knowing that is we have to balance everyone. The fact that they have that First Amendment right to say what they want, and they a lot of times choose to do that off of social media, through emails, things like that. But it doesn't, and it shouldn't circumvent the rights of those to feel safe in their workplace, in their schools, or in their homes as well.
Thank you for that. One of our viewers has a really great question. It's about the M in BTAM, the management. And so I don't know if you can provide any insight about the importance of management. Case management is what they're talking about in this case. So whether it's the, just the one you mentioned, CJ at the school, how does that progress? How do you check back in? How do, institutions with limited resources keep track over time?
Absolutely. Management is paramount to this entire process. The M in STAMP, well, we chose to use mitigation instead of management because we do want management. They're essentially the same thing. The way I tended to describe it is management can go on for a really long time, which is possible. We hope to try to mitigate these threats to be able to move on to the next one and things. But the point still stands that whoever brought this up is right on point with this. In context and documentation are probably the two most things that I see in BTAM. Context being what was the circumstances around when the person made the threat. And then all teams, BTAM teams, no matter what your team looks like, whether it's a city team, an agency team, or a state team like what we have in Arizona, we have to document these things from the very beginning to the very end. And a trainer once said to me that if it's, especially in law enforcement, if it's not written down someplace, it didn't happen. Very important when it comes to BTAM. There are examples out there in the US right now of good examples where teams did do a good job of documenting everything that they did to try to manage and mitigate the situation. And then there's some that may not have gone the way you would want to be. And unfortunately, I like how Melissa talked about it before. It is there's a cost benefit to this. And there's also a legal side to this where if we're not doing everything we can, when we know about something and we're not documenting it, it could come back and, you can lose a career out of it. And the ultimate goal, it could cost someone their life if we're not tracking these things all the way through.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Aaron, kind of just to add on that, I mean, management is, it's a great question because the management aspect, the M, is really the least researched part of BTAM, right? And so there's a huge gap in the evidence base on management specifically. And so I know that there's a lot of researchers and a lot of different universities and places across think tanks and things across the country and even outside the country that are really focused on this and are doing a lot of studies on management specifically. But it is, a very important aspect of BTAM. And it is a difficult balance, I think, too, as you talk about a lot of these communities with different resourcing priorities. And management is really important to ensure that that threat is mitigated for good.
Very good. Thank you. I can't believe how fast time flew here because I feel like there is just so much interest in this topic, but we promised people 45 minutes and boy, we have to give it to them. I want to let our viewers know that we will send out a recap. So all of you who are chiming in on the Q&A, we will include in that, so CJ, some homework, more on that Tempe Care 7 program and maybe more on how to help businesses with this. And Melissa, any extra resources you think of. But in the meantime, I want to thank everyone for coming and for tuning in. I want to especially thank Melissa Zisler and CJ Wren, our guests, for giving their time. I wish we could go on longer because this is just so important. But viewing audience, thanks again. We will send a recap, and then Melissa and CJ, I'll follow up with you after this for what we'll say in that. So with that, this is Ensight, and please go to our website for more information, Ensight at unomaha.edu. It's on your screen there. And so with that, we'll go ahead and end